Hey, longevity junkie, it's time to get your fix. I'm Nikki Leigh.
I'm Buck Joffrey.
And today we talk with Dr. Pamela Peeke, physician, scientist, and best-selling author, about her groundbreaking work at the intersection of women's health, fitness, and neurobiology. Also, we have an incredible story of Angus Barbieri, the Scottish man who famously fasted for 382 days. That's a whopping amount of time.
Yeah, it's more than the 3-day thing, right? But
Right.
hey,
How are you doing, Buck?
I'm doing pretty good. Summer is now in full session here, right? Kids out of school. Take a
That's true.
16-year-old is trying to get her driver's license, and so
Ooh.
we've been driving a lot. So I've been wearing a helmet in the car.
You've been
But
wearing a helmet. You're just
yeah,
making sure all the pads.
isn't it crazy though? Like, do you remember getting your driver's license? I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
weird to think there was a time where you had to think about all these things, like on the road, like stop signs, and like now you can just go on autopilot. I've been driving for decades at a
Yeah.
time. It's kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's all the little nuances. Do you ever look at the driver's license booklet that she's studying and like read it over a little bit?
Oh, I don't even know if is it even a real physical booklet anymore.
Oh,
I mean,
shoot. I like
it's
the
probably
booklets, but yeah.
completely online. I mean, I remember I had to do driver's ed, and it was like, I went to something after school, and it reminded me of, like the Breakfast Club with all the kids like sitting there,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
you got the stoner, the athlete, and all. It was like that was like at driver's ed, and then they would show us like films of people getting crushed in car accidents.
Right.
Like that. I don't know if they do that anymore, but it certainly was a good motivation to try to be, a little careful out there. But how about you? What's up? Yeah.
I'm in Utah right now. So I'm in
Really?
beautiful Utah. Oh my God, it's so gorgeous. And
Yeah.
we did a hike last night. It was a pretty crazy hike because we had to kind of forge our own path eventually to a trail. But it was beautiful, beautiful views, beautiful. The weather here in Utah is really stunning. So
Yeah.
yes, for me too, I guess summer kind of has started, especially mentally. So I'm like, no, I gotta get back.
Oh, good.
Like
Well, is that good? I mean, what does a summer in
I
Nikki's
don't
brain
know
look
if
like?
it's good. I don't know if it's good because I stress about it.
Yeah.
So it's good if I'm not stressing about it and I'm like, okay, I'm on vacation mode. Let's just be chill. But I get so paranoid daily about like, you're not productive enough. You're not doing this. You're not, you don't have these markers or goals accomplished. So it's like even my vacation time that's supposed to be like relaxing and no stress. It's like I put myself through this stress for no reason.
I don't think that's
like,
uncommon. I don't think it's just you.
No.
I mean, I'm kind of like that too.
I think it is common, but I feel like we need to figure out how to not do that because if we're able to actually rest, then we'll be better.
With Zoom and technology and all that, like a lot of times people don't even have to go to the office, anything like that. But what that means is, okay, now you don't necessarily have hours, but that actually means a lot of people end up working all of the time instead of the times that they're supposed to work because they're constantly connected. They're constantly being able to, be productive. Whereas like
you're reachable, like we know you're reachable. So you have to be on. Yeah.
Yeah. In the analog days, you were out. And then, if there was a phone, maybe you'd catch somebody at home. Maybe you wouldn't. It wasn't cell phones and stuff. It's funny. I'm like sounding so old. And when I was a child.
There are people out there that are like, totally, I feel you. I understand. I remember.
Well, anyway, what do we got going on here today?
Yeah. I'm actually kind of excited. I think we should just get into this this incredible story of Angus. I mean, his fasting. I think that's where we should start.
So, let's do that.
I'm excited to learn about him. All right, here we go. So Angus Barbieri was a Scottish man who in 1965 to 1966 undertook one of the longest recorded fasts in history. Weighing 456 pounds, at the start, he fasted for 382 days, over a year. So consuming only tea, coffee, sparkling water, vitamins, electrolytes, and yeast extract with occasional milk or sugar. He was closely monitored by doctors at Mayfield Hospital in Dundee, Scotland, but most of his fasting happened at home. Barbieri's motivation was to reach his ideal weight, and he lost a total of 276 pounds, ending the fast at 180 pounds. After the fast, he gradually reintroduced solid foods, starting with a boiled egg and a slice of buttered bread, etc., etc. His fast set the world record for the longest period without solid food, a record that actually still stands today. Medical followed up found no ill effects of this, and Barbieri has maintained a healthy weight for years after. He later moved, married, and had children, and he died in 1990. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he had a lot to run off of. It's not like we could do it fast.
I'm
like
sort
that.
of wondering, because with the follow-up, and maybe Phil can look this up, but I mean, if he ended up gaining some of that weight back or not, I'm curious about that.
Well, it said that he, maintained it, so I'm sure he didn't get into the obesity. And then also, though, finding a love and having a family and things like
Yeah.
that are
Well,
real.
usually people get fat at that point.
Well, true, but he probably got the girl because he was feeling so good, and then hopefully
Yeah.
the love just kept the the illumination of his life going, and then he had a happy, healthy life. Buck's over here trying to squash that right now.
You know how it really works.
I'm just gonna live in the fantasy.
Stay in and order a pizza. You start watching movies, buddy.
I hope not.
Oh well.
Well, and also I want to add in too, though. After it took 5 years to returning to eating normally, and then he gained back about 16 pounds. So that's not bad, actually.
Okay. Well, so what this tells us is a couple things, right? Like when you have those fat stores, he had enormous amounts of storage of energy, right? That's what those fat stores are. Now, he had to be healthy enough to do this, like metabolically healthy enough to do this. Like there's plenty of disease issues, or if you're not healthy enough, even though you're super overweight, that could become a problem. But, they basically gave him the things that he needed. They gave him electrolytes. They monitored his labs. I understand they were pretty careful with that. But what this really shows us is ketosis, right? So his body relied entirely on fat stores. And we talk about ketosis basically when the body starts using the breakdown of fats, which are called ketone bodies, instead of glucose, preferentially for muscle energy and for brain energy. And actually, the brain prefers ketone bodies. So what interesting is in his case too is that he was still active, so he had pretty minimal muscle loss apparently, because again, ketosis is sufficient, and he had plenty of protein storage. The other thing apparently is he never got really hypoglycemic, meaning his blood glucose never went really low. Okay, so why would that be if you're not taking in any sugar? Well, how is he running on that? Well, there is the understanding of something called gluconeogenesis, which is essentially the idea that that you can get the breakdown of fats, namely glycerol and various amino acids, that can essentially come together and, create glucose, blood sugar that you need in order to survive. So you don't need glucose to live, you don't have to take it externally if you've got fat stores. So all of this is basically sort of this big expression of this experiment of ketosis at a grand level, and just showing you how it works. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. I feel like our body, as I do all these episodes, I'm just learning that how resilient and self-reliant it really is. It's our bodies are so intelligent. And I mean, I'm very happy for this man too. To lose that much weight, that's incredible. To lose 276 pounds. I mean,
I think people do that in the modern age too, with these gastric bypasses and stuff like that.
But he did it old-fashioned way.
He did the old-fashioned way, and
I like it.
More power to him.
I really do think doing it the old-fashioned way is probably one of the reasons why he was able to really kind of keep it off. because his body's went through the appropriate steps instead of, like this Ozempic or gastric bypass surgeries. Like you're skipping a lot of steps, and your body has to adjust to that crazy adjustment that you just made unnaturally.
Yeah. Well, there is
And it just
a little
doesn't
bit of
feel.
feedback mechanism
Mm,
that happens. I talked to a guy who was an expert in this recently, and he calls it sort of the lipostat, like
hmm,
instead of a thermostat. And
mm,
he was basically saying that you can effectively kind of reset this thing, but the problem is that the more fat you have, the higher that lipostat sets it at. So basically, the more fat you have, the more your brain thinks it needs to keep. So kind of a interesting idea. So basically, he brought it down to a certain level, and somehow if he was able to continue to only gain a few pounds, he's obviously done something physiologically in his brain as well. Cause that's not an easy feat. I mean, I think rebound eating is a big, big problem, rebound weight gain. So anyway,
mm-hmm. But I think
interesting
that's
story.
also attached to like emotional eating. Like that's why
Yeah.
because they're just not happy. This guy seems to have been super happy, enough to attract a wife and have a family and have a nice rest of his years. I don't know. I like this guy.
He could have
I wish it was
he could have found a wife. There's people different taste out there and all sorts of different flavors. So no.
Yeah, but oh my God. He clearly wanted to make a change in his damn life,
I
Buck.
know.
Let him make
Okay,
the
okay.
damn
I'm just
change.
saying.
And then he wanted to attract what will keep him in this
Just
change.
trying
So,
not to
like,
get us canceled. Just trying to not get us canceled here. I'm just kidding.
we're definitely, I think I think we're getting through the cancel culture,
Or
actually.
I hope so. Anyway,
I think we are.
Well, let's
All
move
right.
on here.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk to physician, scientist, and New York Times bestseller author, Dr. Pamela Peeke. Welcome back to Longevity Junkie. It's time for our guest interview. It's The Breakdown with Dr. Pamela Peeke. Dr. Pamela Peeke is an internationally renowned physician scientist and thought leader in integrative and preventative medicine, a Pew Foundation scholar in nutrition and metabolism. She is assistant professor of medicine at the University of Maryland and a fellow of both the American College of Physicians and the American College of Sports Medicine. Dr. Peeke is a New York Times best-selling author with her books Body for Life for Women, Fight Fat After 40, and The Hunger Fix, to name a few. She is also a TEDx speaker and a former chief medical correspondent for Discovery Health TV, widely recognized for her pioneering work on stress, nutrition, and women's health. Well, welcome to the show, Dr. Peeke. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Just sort of hanging out right now. I was trying to find my drink. Oh, it's not here. Okay, so I guess we're not going to do that kind of hanging out.
Well, you were
music.
earlier. Yeah, she did have some nice little music, piano
lounge
music
music
coming on, setting the tone. Lounge music with her.
I can turn it back on again if you like.
Well, it's about 2:00. I always say wait till about 4 usually, but it is the summer.
No, wait a minute. What? It's
5 o'clock somewhere.
No, it's wine o'clock right now.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, I love that. Well, I've in reading your introduction, like you have had a remarkable career spanning from medicine, research, media. What drew you to focus so much on lifestyle medicine and specifically women's health?
Well, it's interesting, Nikki. When I first started out, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, seriously, there was no women's health. That was a joke. When I came to the National Institutes of Health, we knew more about men's breast cancer, which is a rare disease, than we did about women's breast cancer. So, okay, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah.
And so there was that. So I knew that couldn't go well. We absolutely had to get to the bottom of it. I have an interesting habit of showing up at just the right time. I don't know. I'm just sort of like looking up to the sky going, Well, for real, because when I got to the NIH, guess what they did? Out of the blue, they started, drum roll, the Office of Women's Research. Who knew?
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness, the genders are.
Did they start it because of you, or or did it just happen?
I took credit for it for many years,
Yeah.
actually. And no, but seriously, for real, I was so pleased. And the first director, Vivian Pinn, became a very good friend of mine. And I was thrilled to see that we were actually throwing some money behind very unique studies that finally began to drill down into exactly what are the differences between the sexes, because there's huge differences that are like literally life and death. Because pharmaceutical companies were only testing men for like all kinds of medications, cardiac medications, psychiatric medications, only to find out that in women, it could get ugly. And in men, it was working well. Like, oh no, so pull back and start doing this a little bit more, methodically. So I love that. And Nikki, in answer to your question about lifestyle, it never made sense to me, ever, to split a body up into parts. Let's go see the gallbladder in room 308. Well, what about the human being that was attached to the gallbladder, and all the complexities of that human being? And, when you saw heart disease and lung disease and all the rest of it, including diabetes, obesity, and this and that, it's a very integrative, comprehensive system that leads you to this. And, it involves everything from genetics to your environment to physical activity, sleep, nutrition, how you handle stress. You have to put it all together. And then I watched as slowly but surely, a little slower than I wanted, but, slowly but surely, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, was birthed. It's like, it's about time, folks.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I've
Right.
always heard women aren't little men. I've heard that a lot in like old research, or coming up now talking about older research. Like they're like, why don't you give women their own tests and their own chance at having different, outcomes and lifestyle as well.
Well, let's start with something that ought to piss off a lot of women out there, including you, Nikki.
Go for
and
it.
Buck,
Let's go for it.
Buck, come along, okay?
I'm on for the ride. I'm here.
Let's go to a woman's weight, right? So where did those weird metropolitan those weight charts, come up? Where did they get generated from? They were generated in 1950, 1950. And they were based upon young white men who qualified for the Metropolitan Life Insurance. So they would say, oh, look, most of these men tend to be, like 5'9", or I don't know what the hell they were in 1980, but I think they were shorter. And then, their weight was like, 180 or something. I don't know. I'm just making it up. And then you know what they did with women's weights? They just sat there and they probably just, had dinner at a bar somewhere and just said, I don't know, what do you think you should do? I don't know, let's make it up. So what they did was they just said, well, if a man is 180, a woman should be 120. So that's how they did it. They literally did something I love to call MSU, make stuff up.
Wow.
And so they just made it up.
Sounded like a university here for a second.
Yeah.
I know.
It might
Well,
be.
seriously, Michigan State University.
Yeah, you're right.
So for real, they just made it up. And so for years and years and years, women were imprisoned with this really bizarre chart that came out of nowhere. And that was not based upon science. Now, flash forward, here we are in 2025. What are we doing now? First, women come in all sizes. And, ethnicities and hybrids thereof. And therefore, things get a lot more complex. You have to now drill down into what is a normal. Now, here's what I love. And I'm actually writing my next book right now. And so this is going to be hugely highlighted in a little
What
teaser
number
alert.
book is this?
Number 6. I have
Oh, wow.
3 New York Times bestsellers. My 4th became the Discovery show, Could You Survive, that I hosted as I was their chief medical correspondent. And another one was a national bestseller as well. And so I'm kind of rocking it on number 6 here and having some fun. But my expertise is actually body composition. All right. So I've written the chapter in the textbooks and back and forth on women's body composition, womb to tomb. Right. And I got to tell you something. Girlfriends out there are starting to pay more attention to their muscles, and to,
Definitely.
their body fat percentage. And who the hell cares what your weight is, so long as your body composition is healthy and shows that you're fit and, relative to your age and everything else. And I think that is a marvelous, marvelous change. So we get off this stupid weight thing. So I brought the weight thing up specifically because, we lacked scientific evidence about women's body composition, and we all suffered for it,
Could you brought up something I didn't know about? Maybe you could give us an example, Pamela, like medication-wise. Can you give us an example of where, like, something works really well for men, but doesn't work for women? And
Doesn't work for women.
And that we've kind of lost that? And
Very, very good question, Buck. One of the first times we really became aware of this was with the antidepressants. And we actually found that some of the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I'm not going to mention brand names or anything, but they work really well with women. Women were like, okay, bring it on. And for men, it was devastating. They did very poorly. For that matter, it wasn't an antidepressant. It made them worse. And so that was one of the first things. And then in some of the antihypertensives, they worked incredibly well for men, and they worked terribly for women. And for that matter, they had some very serious side effects. And so that's when suddenly people got the big wake-up call, like, maybe we ought to do something radical and starting with men and then just inferring that everything is going well with women, when the actual biological sexes are very, very different in their response to certain medications and therapeutics in general. So now we really make a big business out of this. And I think that also helped fuel a lot of what we're doing in women's healthcare right now.
You have a signature framework around mind, mouth, and muscle. And I really wanted to dive into that a little bit and understand it in practical terms for ourselves and for our audience, but also, like, why do you believe that these 3 areas are so central to long-term health?
I'm so glad you brought that up. When I first wrote I have to laugh, because when I wrote my first book, I had like a real back and forth with the big publisher that was going to publish it, and it became a huge success, but they were yelling and screaming. They were old school, and they were saying, you always start with, the mouth. It's all about what you stick in your mouth, and it's all about the food thing. What is this mind thing? Why don't we just stick that in the background? And I said, if you want me to write this book, look in my eyes, look. If you want me to write the book, if you want me to be traveling all over the country and, pushing the book and the concepts and stuff, you're going to roll with me. It's mind first. Nothing happens with physical activity, with sleep, with stress management, right? Or nutrition, unless your head is in the right place. You're not a robot. It all starts with the mind. So I finally beat them down into submission. You can clearly see that I'm very subtle and gentle when I
You're
talk
very
to people.
Yeah.
My sledgehammer
There's
is
just
over here if you'd like to
easy
see
way
it.
about you.
Yeah. So
No, I mean, for real,
I've heard that publishing a book is actually hard, and I mean that not just in publishing the book, but getting what you want to say out there be published. Like that these publishing companies and editors and stuff like to kind of guide the books and ideas rather than allowing the actual like data to speak for itself. They don't
It
like
didn't
challenging
happen
old
with
school.
me.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to hear that because that's
No,
not
no, for
necessarily what
real.
always happens.
No, I kind of got the swing of it with the first book. I was like, oh, so this is how it works. And then, of course, when I got a New York Times bestseller out of it, they got kind of quiet. And they were like, oh, okay, woman knows which way is up. And so they left me alone. And obviously, really, in all seriousness, the publishing houses that I've worked with are huge, and they're really, really, they've got great teams. And I really appreciate the resources and the backup that I've had, because to your point, Nikki, it's hard. When you get out there with a book and everything, it's hard to write it. It's hard to kind of, get the teams around it and to get the messaging right and all the rest of it.
But you got mind, mouth, muscle out there.
Yeah, mind, mouth, muscle was where it was at. I started with mind, right? And I kind of like alliteration anyway, so mind, mouth, muscle. It makes it really simple, to keep in mind. So everything starts with the mind. And what I love to do, and Buck, as a fellow physician, I know that you probably did this countless times in your career, and that is when you really want to get someone to change, to get someone to really come on board with something is going to be very good for them, you've got to kind of unzip their brain, jump in there, look at the world through their eyes, and kind of see what's important to them and what their priorities are, and then use those to be able to put together a program mentally where they're on board. Like, you really want to, do a, be there for your grandchildren. Well, you got to start working on it right now. And let's do that. You're going to be there. You're going to be there to see your daughter go down that aisle. And it's all going to be exciting, whatever the issue may be. You just have to kind of go there. I think for years, people were treated like they were robots. Like, shut up and do this. And without much engagement. And, I don't want to break anyone's heart, but that doesn't work. It's just like a big waste of time. I mean, someone could grind through it for a day or two, or maybe even a week. And then after that, the whole thing falls apart and you default back to your familiar place. So that's why mind, mouth, muscle was so important.
So when you talk about the mind in specific, I guess a lot of it, correct me if I'm wrong, is issues with stress these days that people have. I mean, you've alluded it. Everything starts with the mind. What kinds of things are we ignoring when we don't think about chronic stress as part of the medical, paradigm?
All right. Great question, Buck. So in my laboratory at the National Institutes of Health, I studied stress hormone. And actually, I used a specific disease, which is considered rare, but not like ridiculous, is Cushing's. And Cushing's disease is where your pituitary gland in your brain is cranking out a hell of a lot more stress hormone predecessors than it should. And as a result, weird things started happening with your body. Now, what intrigued me, and this is why, in answer to your question about stress, why I thought, wait a minute now, this isn't just some sort of, airy-fairy, Birkenstock weird moment here about stress. It's like, whoa, we got some serious things going on with the body when your stress is out of control. So the first thing I noticed, and this is where I kind of, my claim to fame, was the belly becomes big. Men look like they're pregnant. Women definitely look like they're pregnant. and it becomes kind of enormous. And as we say in all of the endocrinopathies, the hormone, diseases, you look weird. There's something weird going on here.
Yeah.
So I looked at that belly, and as these Cushing's patients came in from all over the world, because, we were the clearinghouse at the National Institutes of Health, I was able to go into the OR and actually grab the fat from deep inside the belly as well as their subcutaneous. Here's what I found, and drilling forward, I was known as the fat doctor. I'm not quite sure if I took that well, but so I was walking around with my little fat and, my little container from the OR. So here's the gig. Stress hormone is absolutely essential for life. If you don't have it, you die. And so enough stress hormone, like if I walked right behind you, Nikki, and I went, boo, and you're going, whoa, all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, your stress hormone went up momentarily, and you're like, okay, I'm on red alert. What kind of weirdness is going on here? And then you calmed down because you said, okay, it's just Dr. Peeke acting crazy. All right, the same thing goes throughout life. It's just a little ups and little downs, strange things that go on. And that's how your body was meant to be. It was never, let's do it again, in case you missed this word, never meant to be walking around with elevated levels of stress hormone on a chronic basis. That's a very, very bad thing. Why?
And a lot of people do it.
Like 99.9% of America is walking around like this as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Why is this not a great idea? It's because stress hormone, which is called cortisol or glucocorticoids. All right. So cortisol affects almost every tissue in the human body. So if you have any kind of inflammatory process, like let's say, you got a little arthritis. Now, what's the word itis mean? Inflammation of, bronchitis, all that. All right. So if you have a vulnerability toward anything like that, under stress, did you ever notice how it gets 50 times worse? We'll start with college. Remember right around finals and midterms, everyone busted out in pimples, right? And you're looking at your face, you're going, oh my God. But guess what you were doing? You were up all night, you were eating crap, you're stressed out of your brains, and then there you have it. Well, what is that? It's a dermatitis, right? And so what I'm saying is that you can't just say that the brain and the mind are separated from the body. We got to stop that. Everything is one big biome, right? And so if you can control the levels of stress, and Buck, when you and I did critical care. So, when you and I have been in funky situations with a patient or something, and the stress level in the room was going like this, guess what happened? Remember the rule? Since you're in control, since we as physicians are in control, everyone looks at our face. And they say, if we look panicked, that's a very bad thing. Everyone gets panicked. But if you're calm and you're just saying, okay, we're doing the orders and we're trying to assess the situation and we're all on board here, we're getting aligned, guess what happens? Everyone, that whole tempo comes down. That's a very good thing to do all throughout life. Outside of life-threatening stuff. I mean, someone's pointing a gun at your head, that's a whole different ballgame. But outside of that, everything else that occurs. So we have to do everything we can to be able to modulate cortisol. It is life-saving for us. We just don't want it too high, too long. That's not a great thing.
The other thing I just point out is, there are some direct metabolic effects we know. I mean, if you have increase in cortisol, it is definitely going to make you more insulin sensitive, which, we've talked about on this show several times. Insulin resistance is going to affect your metabolism and lead to other issues like metabolic syndrome. And, then you've got diabetes. And so again, a lot of that is belly fat and those kinds of things. So absolutely has a, real clear physical mechanism. It's not just a hand-wavy concept.
Oh, there's no question. So when we were looking at the Cushing's patients, what's really interesting is because they had a tumor, this was not a malignant tumor, it was just a tumor doing its thing. The level of stress hormone we measured in these people with Cushing's was the highest we've ever seen in human beings, because it's just this little tumor that just keeps cranking it out.
Yeah.
It's like, stop it already, until you take that little tumor out of the pituitary gland. And so you're absolutely correct. There's a reason why they all had big bellies. Guess what? That belly fat was not subcutaneous.
Yeah.
It wasn't the pinch an inch type, like you kind of grab some and pull it out or something. No, sadly, it was fat that was deep inside the belly, the worst kind of fat to, have too much of, because it's highly associated with diabetes, heart disease, immune dysfunction.
Cancer.
Oh, yeah, of course, cancer by definition. And all of it. So as soon as we popped that tumor, their bellies came down. And they were able to, over the course of time, drop that, what we call visceral fat, down to its normal levels. Yeah.
By just taking a hold of your stress levels and bringing them down?
That's correct.
In that case, though, with those Cushing's patients, you had to do more than just
we took them into neurosurgery.
Yeah.
And the pituitary gland is kind of right here. You actually flip the nose up, and then the gland is right there. And so that's the kind of surgery we did. Sometimes the tumors appear at other interesting places, like the adrenal gland itself and the lungs, but about 90% of them are up in the brain.
Well, okay, so speaking of brain, like one of the things that I love about you is how much you emphasize a philosophy of belief that people can change their habits and behaviors even after years of unhealthy patterns of maybe, having this visceral fat stored because you're so stressed all the time. But what you mentioned the brain. So what exactly is happening in the brain when someone makes this lasting change, and how can you keep that lasting change going?
Do you know what an aha moment is?
Yeah.
We've all had them. Part of it is there's a readiness. So there's a beautiful book on change by Prochaska, which I'm sure you know all about. And it's the 7 stages of change. And, let's just say you're a smoker, right? And I walk up to you and I say, yo, smoking, it's not really the greatest, and here's some statistics, whatever. And then your response is like, oh yeah, like thanks for telling me all that. And then you walk away and you light one up. So you're not ready yet. And then what happens over the course of time is you keep contemplating it. It kind of comes back again and again. And it just sort of does it somewhat randomly, and also triggered by events in life. And so I oftentimes will see, someone who sees a quote of mine in some magazine, or I don't know, whatever. 3 years later, they show up and they go, I'm ready. Like, whoa. And what made you ready? What's that about? And they'll tell you that there was a life event that took place. Doesn't have to be huge. You don't have to have a building fall on you or something. It's just something. It's like, a friend of mine, just got diagnosed with diabetes, and now they have to inject themselves every day with insulin. They have to do a needle, and I saw them do it. I was horrified. And then I'm like, well, they're by the grace of God, honey, And so all of a sudden they have that aha moment. Right? And you have to be in a state of readiness. What's the old, I think it's a Buddhist, saying, and that is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to shift topic a little bit. It's sort of associated, but in the Hunger Fix, you introduced the idea of food addiction, which I think is really interesting. Wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that. In particular, I remember seeing some pretty impressive data that sugar addiction in particular is an absolute real thing that really could and should be compared to any other kind of serious harmful drug addiction.
Yeah, the Hunger Fix was the first consumer book. There was a textbook that came out about a year earlier than that, but it was, mostly for providers and, researchers, and it was excellent. But the Hunger Fix was the first time, we kind of went public and basically made it very simple to follow and connect the dots. So it starts with our reward center in our brain. The fancy word for that is the nucleus accumbens. But let's just call it the reward center. It squirts out dopamine. And dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter. We love that. Okay. So if you see your dog running toward you and you haven't seen him for a while, you're so excited and you're filled with pleasure. Dopamine. It's all over the place, right? You're feeling really good. All right. Now, dopamine occurs, that little squirting of dopamine occurs to help encourage behaviors that help you survive. So if I eat an apple, I feel great. My dopamine level went up and I say to myself, hell, I want more of those. That's a very good thing for me. I like that, right? So that's a good thing. Now, let's look at the ultra-processed foods out there. And to your point, Buck, the stripped-down sugars, which are beyond processed, they're stripped. There's nothing left but ultra-sweetness. Now, in vulnerable brains, and I say this because addiction is genetic. There's a lot of genetics in addiction. We know this very well from alcoholism and, and all the rest of it. And we've followed this with excellent research over the years. So in those brains that are already primed, for an addictive urge, they really have a problem with the super, ultra, uber sweetness of these, and the only way I could describe it is a science fair project. It's not food anymore. No, it's not. Now, the food companies were not stupid. They sat down in their laboratories and they said, what can we do to be able to create a science fair project that will hit the reward center like a 2x4? And in those people who are much more vulnerable, they're going to overeat and continuously, and then they're going to develop a habitual need for that kind of whatever, kind of food stuff in the big boxes and the bags and the rest of it. And that's what happens with so many of these people. When the Hunger Fix came out, it's really interesting. I was contacted by one of the biggest addiction groups in the country, and they asked me to, it was actually out in Malibu. They asked me to come out and set up, a whole way to eat again once you came off the big stuff. And it's never just one thing anymore, by the way. It's 2025. So it's alcohol and a whole slew of drugs. All right. So one of the first things you notice is that when someone has actually is coming off drugs / alcohol, right? What's the first thing you think they reach for?
Food, yeah, probably. Something
They
to oral
want
fixate.
Sugar.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
sweet
got
sugar.
it. So it's coffee with about 4 pounds of sugar in it. And then if there's candy bars around, if there's something sweet somewhere along the line, their hands are all over it. What it is a transfer addiction. So they're going from the big stuff, which is illegal and, get you in all kinds of trouble, to something that literally addicts call the legal stuff, which is food.
Although I do think it's interesting that, I know people who are real sugar addicts, right? And who've never had drug addiction issues or alcoholism. And so there also seems to be, other than this just purely transfer type addiction, seems to be something unique about this type of syndrome as well.
Oh, no, there's no question about it. So I want to be very clear. When you are truly an addict and you're in a rehab center and all the rest of it, okay, that's hardcore. And there is no question you're going to transfer to the high sugar. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to recreate in your reward center the high that you typically got with drugs, but you can't get there because that stuff is way too high. So what you do is you crank it up to a level of, in your mind, reward from the sweetness that will, kind of get closer, but nowhere near, drugs. Now, to your point about the people just walking around, who just sort of have a sweet tooth and whatever, of course you don't have to be, addicted to drugs and the rest of it. You just, everyone's got different tastes. And, sometimes it gets a little out of control here and there and everywhere. But really, at the end of the day, it's just a matter of knowing yourself and modulating.
So I wanted to, when I think of sugar or any addiction of eating, I just kind of default to, this is somebody struggling with emotional or compulsive eating because you're under stress. And I feel like that's the hardest thing for me personally, at least, to actually understand and, break apart in order to attack and accomplish not having that addiction anymore. Do you have any strategies that you found that works best to break these type of emotional or compulsive eating cycles under stress?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you're a child and you're really feeling stressed out for whatever reason, right? What's the easiest thing to do? How do you soothe yourself? It's food. And what do parents oftentimes do? Oh, was it a really rough time at school? Here, have a candy bar. Or here,
let's go
have
get
a
an
fill
ice
in the
cream.
blank. Let's go get an ice cream. Let's do that whole thing. So, people are habituated with that at a very early age. And I always caution parents, there are a lot of ways to soothe a child, and stuffing food in their mouth every single time that there's a challenge in life is probably not a great habit to get into. So that's the first issue. But really, it's to your point, Nikki, which is a really, really powerful one. And that is that there's a huge emotional component here. And many people who are anxious, and by the way, here's a little gender specificity. Women are 20 times more likely to be anxious than men. Women have the generalized anxiety disorder 20 times more frequently than men. It's built into our DNA. Now, obviously, there's a bell-shaped curve for the whole thing, but on average, that's true. And this will, manifest itself in motherhood, especially because you're anxious, like, where is he? Where is he right now? I need to know, and that type of thing. So women already have a little red flag about anxiety. The next piece is, what if you add to that some level of depression? I don't mean you're down and out and about ready to go to a psych facility. I just mean that, you're sad. Things aren't going the way they're supposed to go, and you're feeling lost in the rest of it. What do? You soothe. And the easiest legal way to soothe is with food. And it's on every single corner of this country. And so it's very accessible. It's fairly cheap. And, there you have it. So what I always ask is, what is the trigger? What's triggering you? Why did you pick up that, 20 pounds of Cheetos and start doing that? What's up with that? Right? And then they'll say, well, actually, my ex called me and blah, blah, and all the rest of it. And then you go down that path and start parsing it. And so, eating disorders per se, The most common eating disorder in the United States is binge eating. And why do you binge eat? Because you want to soothe. You know what it is? It's not, as it were, food anymore. Well, you'll love this, Buck. It's an anesthetic. It's numbing you. You know, I mean, everyone knows the feeling. We've all had like that rotten day, you know, and then for every single person is why on the Hunger Fix, they have a cupcake on the cover just to trigger the hell out of everybody. But, you know, for me, it was always, you know, like grab a cupcake. I mean, for me, a cupcake was just a little piece of cake with about 30 pounds of frosting on top. And, you know, grab one of those things. And for about like 5 minutes, you're like in La La Land. And then suddenly you come back to reality and you realize, oh my God, what have I just done? I just ate a 10-pound cupcake. So that's what classically happens. I ask people to go back and make the connection with the trigger. There's always a trigger.
So that's the strategy to go back and find whatever that trigger is.
Yeah, people are numb to it. They don't want to see it sometimes. And what I'm saying is that it's there. There's no question. It's being ignited inside of you. And then boom, it's just in your mind too painful to confront. So you need to anesthetize yourself. And so you find whatever your default is.
I wanted to just kind of take the idea of that kind of weight gain and have you comment on something else, which was something you termed menopause, which I think is a clever combination of menopause and pot belly, right? Menopause, very relatable for a lot of women. You know, I spent some time in the world of cosmetic surgery myself and saw women all the time. It's a very frustrating thing, very healthy otherwise. Menopause comes in, all of a sudden they're coming in for liposuction going, I never thought I would need that. So what's going on hormonally and metabolically during midlife that makes this belly fat appear and so stubborn?
You know, it's interesting. If you Google menopause, it'll say originated from Dr. Pamela Peeke, and it's actually in the flippin' dictionaries.
Oh, is it?
Oh, I love that.
Oh,
Good
yeah,
for you.
it is.
Oh, that's
I know,
hilarious.
No, I mean, I didn't know until someone told me. They said, "Hey, Pam, you know, might want to Google this."
Yeah,
I think you're in the dictionary. So
like back in
here's the gig.
Shakespeare times, they were using.
I mean, totally. You know, it's like, my God. So, you know what? One of the nice things about writing books is I get to make up words. Okay. You have no control over me. Remember the MSU? So I'm making up words. And where there is no way to describe it, I'll just make one. And so that one actually hit me at 3 a.m. I remember sitting up straight up in bed, my husband thinking I'd lost my mind. And I thought, oh my God, it's menopause. Now, well, what the heck is this? All right. So when a woman is about 40 years old, right? You know, 40 plus or minus, she begins the process of what we call perimenopause. Peri meaning the word, you know, around. So around the time of menopause. So perimenopause actually is the period of time when a woman is very gradually weaning off her sex hormones. Her body is like, okay, we're done now. And then you can't just like overnight say bye-bye. You have to gradually wean off because these sex hormones, estrogen being the big one, influence the function of almost every tissue in a woman's body. And so you have to be respectful for the fact that it's going to take a while for your body to go, whoa, wait a minute now. I was expecting a higher level of estrogen here, and you're kind of, what are you doing here? So over the course of from the age of 40 until menopause hits, which in the United States is about age 52 plus or minus, all right? So it's at least 10 years long, if not longer. And during that period of time, your body begins to do something, and we go back to my favorite topic, body composition. You go through a shape shifting. And so, one day, as many women discover, they wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and they go, what the? And they used to be an hourglass looking kind of body. Now they look like a shot glass. And suddenly that whole middle part is like, what happened? I went to bed and I wake up in the morning. Who put this here? And you're filling in. And then you try to put on those jeans and suddenly you're spilling over the edges. And you don't know what this is. That's why I called it the menopot, because, men have, actually, I have a name for you too. It's manopot. And because you guys, come on now, at the age of 40, you start dropping testosterone at the rate of about 4 to 8% per decade. And suddenly that six pack is, anyway.
And then that's following the Molson muscle that happened in college. It's a constant trauma.
It's totally trauma. Oh my God, you're absolutely right. So, what ends up happening is you develop extra subcutaneous fat. The pinch an inch or pinch a foot or a yard or a mile or whatever's going on down there. But it's stuff that you can kind of shake around. Now, at the same time, girlfriends, listen up. Oh boy, women also put on more visceral fat. And that visceral fat is the fat deep inside the belly, underneath the abdominal muscle wall. Now, I told you before, you need it. It's there for a whole host of reasons because, fat is an endocrine organ. But just like cortisol, too much of it is highly associated with a chronic disease. And so you don't want that. But women during their 40s start picking up that belly. And hormonally, estrogen classically is kind of tried to, restrain any kind of fat in the belly area, deferring instead during the reproductive years to that exon station of fuel for babies during breastfeeding, and that is your butt and your thighs. That's why when women, are pregnant, they're like, oh my God, what is going on? I can't get in a pants or anything. And then when you breastfeed, that fat should come down fairly nicely. But if you don't breastfeed, that could be a problem, right?
What can some women in their 40s or 50s, just because that's like around the menopause time, what can they do before or during this menopause time to prevent or reverse these metabolic changes, also known as like visceral fat compiling?
I know, seriously. Nikki, what I'm a firm believer in, can we get to it as soon as possible? If you're 20 out there listening in on this wonderful podcast, 25, 30, please, hello? Can you please start hitting it now? What do I mean by hitting it? Lay down a foundation of physical activity, which means a nice, wonderful mix of fun things, right? But it's going to be work. Nothing's all fun in life. You need to weight lift. Of course, I'm a strength-trained athlete. I'm a triathlete. And so, I'm like a nutcase about this because by laying down that foundation, it makes it so much easier once you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. It's like I have that solid foundation, right? Plus, it decreases the symptoms of menopause. The hot flashes, the weird sleep, all the stuff that's going on there, and also that menopot, as it were. So it helps kind of control the whole situation. So you need to do that mind-mouth muscle, all the way through, starting with, your teen years, all the way through. Now, let's just say, flash forward, you're 50, and you're like, okay, is it too late for me? Heck no. Come on now. Wake up, girlfriend.
Yeah, just one, I think it's probably important to mention, since this is your space, that the role of hormone replacement as well, specifically, there was some misinformation probably that women had with the Women's Health Initiative, a couple decades ago that still lingers out there. Can you kind of give us a little bit of an idea on your take on hormone therapy for women?
Okay, so to your point, and to brief it up, in the year 2000, it was a long time ago. It was like 25 years ago. So that Office of Women's Research that I talked about before at the NIH, they ran this study, and here's the issue. The issue was they used the wrong participants in the study, and they didn't realize it at the time because, no one studied women. So they were just sort of, doing that MSU thing again and making it up. So they used women that were years out of menopause. They were in their 60s, and you never do that. There's a window of opportunity we learned with subsequent studies that corrected everything. And what it actually showed was that if you start on what we now call, we don't call it HRT anymore, hormonal replacement therapy, it's called menopausal hormonal therapy, MHT. And what we now do is we customize a way to be able to individualize what a woman needs roughly within 5 years of the onset of menopause. So let's just say she hit menopause at 53, all right? All the way up to 58 and even 60, she should be fine to start on some form of menopausal hormonal therapy. I have found menopausal hormonal therapy in women for whom it is appropriate. Right? I mean, if you have a big history of breast cancer in the family, huge history of heart disease, no, you're pretty much excluded. But otherwise, the grand majority of women are like, raise your hand. And it really does help. It helps everything. For instance, it actually helps cardiovascular disease. Here's something else a lot of people don't know. Estrogen now is being recommended for bone health. And we didn't even think about bone health. Bone's never been like a big thing all the way around. And, now we find that it's becoming more and more a subject of conversation because now we know that 60 million Americans, have low bone density. Who knew? Raise your hand if you know when you start, you as a man or a woman, when you start dropping some bone. It's at the age of 28. And people, most women have no clue. They're like, I'll worry about when I'm 60, 65. Too late. So this is why when you mention menopausal hormonal therapy, it's not just about, kind of tamping down on the hot flashes and all the rest of it. One of the things we're finding is that we want to decrease the total number of fractures out there because it's crazy what's going on. 1 in 2 women are going to experience some form of osteoporotic fracture. Who knew that? And then you're a spine guy. 1 million spine and hip fractures occur every single year. What are we doing to be proactive? Well, guess what? As we're kind of circling back on this great conversation, all the things I said before, which is all about, physical activity, strength training, what does it do to your bones? What does it do to your muscles, right? And getting the appropriate nutrition, which means you have calcium and vitamin D, and you're making certain that you have a fairly clean diet with tons of vegetables and lean proteins, etc. Well, you're going to be able to address so many issues in women's health all at one time: cardiovascular, metabolic, bone, it's all good.
You have like a podcast out. You have many books out. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I started my podcast. I think oh my goodness, let's see now, where are we at now? I think around 520 episodes. It's a lot of talking.
Wow.
What is it called? What is it called?
Her.
Okay.
Just her.
Her.
Yeah.
Is it
just
like
her.
So? I'm assuming it's focused on female health. Then,
It's
right? Her?
yeah.
I
Well,
don't know if it's an acronym like HER
It's not
or something.
him.
And just
No, there's probably a hymn floating around out there somewhere.
Cool.
But no, but her is on all of the major, platforms, and it's one of the top shows in women's health and lifestyle. There's your lifestyle again, Nikki. And I'm constantly stressing this, in a big way, and I'm trying to pick up on trends that are taking place. Like there's this I'm going to be having a really interesting one. We just confirmed the guest on this TikTok trend called skinny talk. And what they're doing is they're having women undereat. Yeah, here we go again. And live to be skinny, which is one of the most unhealthy, crazy things. So when I'm done with this podcast, this is going to take on TikTok in a big way. But you see, it's that kind of thing. And also, as a scientist, what I like to do is when something cool comes along that's very, very innovative that people may not be fully aware of, maybe a new study came out, some kind of new technology, I'm on it in about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to share that with people so that they know. And I have that credibility as a physician and a clinical investigator so that they know I vetted this thing and I'm not, just coming up with entertaining nothingness.
When's the next book coming out?
2026.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And we'll be circling back.
Yeah.
Because we can kind of, pick it up from there and have a lot of fun one way or the other.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I just want to close out on kind of a question with your podcast, because you've had so many episodes. What would be what's the biggest piece of advice for women out there to live, longer, healthier, and really attack that longevity goal of theirs?
Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on to your bra straps. Buck, you're not in this. Okay, I know. And
Maybe
if you are, well,
maybe I am.
Okay,
Maybe he is,
whatever.
honestly.
You know what I have to say?
Maybe I can hold on to somebody else's bra straps.
Whatever. Okay.
Hold
you know
on
what
to the nearest bra strap.
And this actually comes out of the big. There's a big Harvard group that studied a huge number of. Actually, it started out as men, and then they followed them and their families and their progeny for years. Guess what they found out? It was social connection. If you think it was like, take more calcium or, do 10,000 more steps. No, it's social connection. And it turns out it has the equal, if not greater power in terms of longevity than physical activity does. And so I'm just saying, go out of your way, do the work to make friends, live a life of meaning and purpose, and keep that connectivity going throughout your entire life. Keep making friends. Keep making them every single day, every year, so that you have a rich connection with other people, because we have found in science it is powerful in its ability to enhance longevity.
I love that. And I love how you just said in the power of science. Like that's really beautiful to me. That's something that definitely strikes a chord with me. So thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, I come locked and loaded with science. It's like, don't argue with me, honey.
Good.
I got the studies.
No, that's good.
Love
and
that.
That's the way I personally
You
like
need
it.
that.
I think it's important, especially in this day and age where it's like everybody has opinions, but a lot of times they're not really founded in much. And so, you're kind of fighting misinformation at the same time. So
No question.
thanks for doing what you do. And we'd love to have you back after you get the new book out.
You got your book.
All right. And you guys, keep it rocking. We need more conversations like this. I saw your other podcast. You're really doing a fantastic job of messaging. So just keep it going as fellow podcasters.
Yeah.
Because that's really what this is all
you.
about.
Great. Thank you
True.
so much.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Peeke.
You're welcome.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junkie. It's time for our healthy takeout. Well, what'd you think, Buck?
Well, I think it's a really interesting thing, interesting conversation, and she's got very good points specifically about like sort of the differences between men and women, and I think it's becoming more and more recognized. As a physician, I think I've always found the issues with women a lot more complicated, especially when it relates to hormonal changes and all that kind of stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, and now some of
Well,
the
women
things that
get pregnant. Like,
yeah.
our whole body changes to, like, grow a human, and then we have to re-regulate ourselves, and it's like, I don't even see how you can compare 2 bodies that do 2 completely different things.
Yeah, I mean, like, we do have some things in common, like metabolic, the way things work and metabolism and cancers and even cardiovascular diseases are different though, because again, it's affected by hormones. And hormones is it's the big difference between the way men and women's bodies work. And so
Mhm,
I think we're still trying to understand that. I would say that a lot of the things that she did talk about actually do relate to men too, probably in certain ways. I mean, even the way we ended up this conversation with community and that kind of thing, I think that's
mm,
probably real for men too. In fact, that might be
mhm,
one of those things that's underappreciated in men is
mhm,
that men are less likely to reach out to one another than women are. Women are
true.
sort of naturally
Just more
seem to be
social
more
or can
social
can turn to somebody and explain their problems too.
or
Like,
be
I feel like there's women have been known to, like, talk more or be able to gossip more or chat with girlfriends or have it or not feel weird about having a therapist where like guys don't really want to talk about their feelings, feel safe about talking about their
yeah,
feelings. They've been, as a child they were told to, don't cry, suck it up, man, be tough.
yeah,
And so yeah, but it's and going back to like social connection, like so talking about the food and how that drives dopamine, I feel the social connection is that, like, natural elevation of, like, dopamine and
yeah,
oxytocin and all these things. So, it's, yeah, really having these places that you feel safe, that you can talk to people, you have a community, that's like a secret little medicine, if you will. And I love
yeah.
that she ended with that. That really made me feel, I don't know, it just made me feel it validated really kind of the things that I've been thinking about recently, which is about like making sure that I make time for social connection or relationships or if I have a relationship that I nurture it.
Right, absolutely. And, I
Mhm.
think the last thing I would just like to emphasize again is I did bring up this women's initiative study basically in 2000. It's really
Mhm.
important. It's one, in my opinion, it's one of the biggest injustices. I don't know. It's just unfortunate that
Mhm.
this paper was construed by many to suggest that that hormone replacement therapy in women was going to cause cancer and,
Oh wow.
as it turns out, there was just a lot of mistakes in terms of the interpretation of that data and the types of hormones that we were talking about. A lot of, the issues related to, hormones derived from animals and things like that. Very complicated, but there's been plenty of follow up on that to show that most women, as Pamela mentioned, significantly benefit from hormone replacement therapy after menopause. And so,
Hmm.
I'm not saying anybody should do anything or not, but I would make sure that you don't get scared away with this 20-year-old study that still pops up in conversations. So
Hmm.
that's pretty much all I have to say about it.
Well, it's also very hard, I would assume. Okay, normally it's hard to get our hormones under like in check. A lot of people
Hmm.
struggle with that. Now imagine someone like, just having a baby or having like menopause or things, then your hormones are all over the place. So and some people don't really most people don't know how to re-regulate that. So having, that's kind of one of the modern advances of medicine, I think, is to be able to have this therapy. So I wouldn't look against it. I would see it more as a help, in order to really regulate your body again. So I would see it as a great assistance rather than something that could be scary or something you don't really want. But one thing I wanted to close out, because we were talking about visceral fat, and I wanted to mention this, but it didn't. I couldn't fit it in the conversation. One thing that I have noticed, and through research and through also just personal experience, like taking what I've researched it and actually put it into practice. If you go to bed before 10 o'clock, or at least by 10 o'clock, the 2 hours before midnight is actually one of the most, like that's going to be where your visceral fat actually goes down. I've realized that having the 8 hours, and B, getting to bed before midnight, like preferably about 10 or before 10 if you can, but I feel like 10 is actually more reasonable. That's when you will see more of your visceral fat shrink, to be honest. And I have seen that in my own, like the earlier I go to bed, that I don't wake up bloated, or I don't wake up I actually wake up thinner. It's like really crazy.
Yeah, and it might be related to this cortisol issue, right? If you are getting to bed earlier, you might be bringing down your cortisol levels, and cortisol ultimately, higher cortisol levels, the stress hormone that she was talking about, are associated with more visceral fat formation. So who knows? Yeah, give it a try. Why
that's
not?
what's helped me, but yeah, exactly.
Anyway, important show, and
happy to have something focused on a little bit more female, or at least bringing that into the light. So yeah, I love that.
Good. Anything else before we close out?
No, I think we're good.
Good. We'll see you next time.
All right, well, I'm going to read us out. And Longevity Junkie is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki, Leigh, Dr. Buck Joffrey, and Phil Ferragamo. We're distributed by our friends at Acast. See you next time.